Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be discussing something that's going to be rather deep and perhaps even disturbing for most of the listeners out there, and some of you out there who are listening today may have even had some direct experience with this, and that is suicide. It certainly affects many teenagers and young adolescents and young adults throughout the United States. And this day and age, it's certainly a complicated world where things can be very frustrating as we try to navigate at those very delicate ages which directions we want to go with our lives and really measure up to the fact, have we really lived up to what we thought we were able to do? And it's certainly a confusing thing to say the least. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is an intuitive and life coach who knew by the age of 4 that she had special gifts, but little did she probably know as her life unfolded that she would find herself in the realm where these young adolescents would come to her and start talking about their experience as they committed suicide. The question is, what happens the day after, which uniquely is the title of the book, Messages from Adolescent Suicides. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Teresa St. Francis. Teresa, welcome to the program today.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm so happy to be on your show.
Well, I'm glad that you're happy. You know, this is our kismet here. You know, this is part of our life contract, isn't it?
Yes, it is part of our life contract. We all have sat down before we got here on Earth and discussed with our friends, family, extended family, aunts, uncles, grandparents, even all animals, on what position we're going to play, what life lessons we're going to learn, whether we're going to be the teacher or the student, and what we were here to do, and as well as our prodigy. So there's a lot that goes into coming here on this planet to live the life that we love.
You know, now when I first heard about that concept, and it's been quite a while, and I thought to myself, really? So we actually somehow in heaven, if you will, let's just kind of put a location here, if you will. So we've made an agreement. We've even decided the kind of parents that we wanted to go and have as parents and the kind of life that we wanted to live. Everybody is unique, so how is that determined? I mean, you come into this as a baby, you really don't remember something like that, do you?
No, not at all. When you come down the birth canal, the gift of the Creator is once you come down the birth canal, you forget your heavenly life, except you do bring forth your life contract that needs to be fulfilled and is intertwined with everybody around you, including your geographic location, your culture, your religion, your education. All of that plays a factor. Even the time that you're born. And in the book, I discuss a lot of that and how it all interconnects into making the person that we are today.
Well, there's no doubt about that when the the listeners read this book, there were sometimes I got glimpses of George Bailey from the movie It's a Wonderful Life.
Absolutely.
You know, here was this guy that was doing what he was doing, living really a charmed life, but came to his wit's end. For anybody who's seen the movie, they know what happens. And he comes to a point that he wishes he was never born. So the angel says, really? Well, I'm going to go ahead and grant you that. Now, in your situation here, 30 years you've been doing this. When did it start? I know it started with a girl by the name of Michelle, I believe it was, and Angela, which was her mother. And this seemed to be the beginning of your path that seemed relatively unexpected for you, wasn't it?
Oh, very unexpected. It was taking me by surprise. It was a clandestine lunch that I had with a girlfriend of mine after seeing Angela and Michelle doing private readings, which I do. And my girlfriend said to me, you look wiped out. What's going on? You haven't been sleeping. And I said, there is so much I need to talk about in a reading with the surviving family members that I can't discuss. It's just too much information, and it's overwhelming. She said to me, write the book. Write the book about what you need to tell everybody that goes on the other side. The messages, the interaction with the angels, how angels affect our daily lives and how they integrate with us, and the signs that they show us before we do anything drastic. And then talk about everything you want to talk about. And I said to her, I really don't want to write the book. Well, lo and behold, my tag team, which is Teachers, Angels, and Guides, were listening, and that night, Michelle knocks on my door in my bedroom, which is my sanctuary place, and we started discussion, and the next thing I know, a couple of nights later, my house is full with spirit, and they're all wanting to tell their story, and I have a voice in the book telling you my struggles and having to write the book. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. I was very reluctant. I was very concerned because I didn't honestly want to listen to everybody's story about what went on, but I was so inspired by their stories, by how spirit engaged with them before they passed, the signs that they got, that the way they utilize people in our lives, the way that they utilize information, and the connection that we all have. And I wanted to share that because they wanted to tell their stories in order to save lives.
Now, it's interesting, as I was reading that, I started getting glimpses of the movie Ghost, Patrick Swayze and Whoopi Goldberg, and she was the medium in there, and as he began to go to her, all of a sudden, she was being pestered by just about everybody who wanted to talk to the other side, meaning the living side. So there's all these ghosts in this room, and I thought to myself, we actually have a friend of ours locally here who does sort of the same thing you do in a way, but not exactly what you do. And she says, there'll be times she'll be sleeping in her room, and all of a sudden there'll be a couple of people standing there, and, what do you want, sort of a thing. And you kind of describe those circumstances. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to try to live with something like this day to day, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. As I said, my bedroom was my sanctuary, but once the idea was blossomed in spirit, and Michelle, who was my liaison, she was my ambassador to the other side, brought through all these adolescents, it never stopped. I mean, there were days that I couldn't tell you if it was morning or night, and there were days that I couldn't tell you if it was a Thursday or a Monday. Everything sort of rolled together for a long period of time. As I was writing the book, I would talk into my cell phone and have a two-way conversation dialogue. Then I would take it to text, and from text we'd clean it up, and then I'd have more stories, and it was just something ongoing all the time because they wanted to illuminate all the information, not only for these adolescents, for the book, to inspire people to live the life that they love, but also to inspire parents to take a look at what they need to look for, some of the critical points, so that we can help these adolescents who are struggling and make society aware that we can't keep sweeping this under the rug. We have to start looking at this as a crisis, which it is. The numbers and statistics are overwhelming, as well as we have to start as a whole society educating everybody that these kids need help, and there is help not only from a physical perspective as well as a spiritual perspective, and this book is a 360 book. It talks about the physical as well as the ethereal aspects of our lives.
And that's true, too, because a lot of times when suicide is being discussed, it's usually the signs, maybe the stories of hopelessness and despair and the feeling like nothing is ever going to change. And we hear this, but for the listeners out there, what we're going to mostly focus on today is that other side where you actually have this opportunity to, let's just say, channel, I guess is the best way to do this, as you do these sessions here, and that you hear what they experience, after they have done this really terrible act of committing suicide. Now, what does happen the next day after a suicide, as described by, for instance, Michelle?
Well, what happens the next day is a very complicated process. It's not simple, I just take my life and I pass over. Every one of those individuals who spoke with me, not only the ones who were included in the book, the ones who weren't included in the book, also talk about how the angels, how their loved ones interacted with them by sending them signs, whether they would actually be people coming into their lives from their past, trying to get them to see their life for the beauty that it was, as well as signs from the angels, whether it's pennies, feathers, all different types of signs. When they talked about their story and when they passed, they talk about what does happen the day after, and being on the other side, being received by your angels of rescue, and meeting up family members and meeting up with their beloved animals, and being in a place that they didn't expect to be in. This was all new to them. This is all new because they thought that they would have been relieved of their obligations, of their pain, of their distress while they were here on earth. And when they got to the other side, for that momentary moment, it was free until they got to look at their life reviews and they got to look at the Akasha records where their library book is. Each one of us has a book of life that has been written since the beginning of time, and it's contained in the Akasha records, which is the library of the universe. And in the book, I talk about that because they tell me about what each person got to see in their own book and what they learned, not only from this lifetime once they got over, and the people they met once they got over, and the interactions that they've learned, and the friendships that they've made.
Now, what I found intriguing about what you wrote about here is that it seemed a great majority of these people, these adolescents that had talked with you, seemed to be involved with college or going to college. Now, what was going on there? Did you just kind of attract a particular realm that way, or what was that all about?
I think in the last 20 years, based on the numbers and the amount of people I've seen moving over to the other side, college seems to be a very big precipice of feeling displaced. We have a whole group of generations of individuals who seem to not be prepared for that major life transition. And that's why I talk in the book, in the chapter Life as a Kaleidoscope, on what we need to do to prepare these young adolescents to move into that educational process. I think there's a lot of things we as society and families and education fail to do to prepare them. And I think I see it in my practice. I've seen it in the work that I do, and the numbers reflect it, that college seems to be a very large precipice of unstabilizing an individual's persona.
Now, I know that in your book that Michelle seems to, and I guess this is the best way I can describe this, because of her action, that she, of committing suicide, I believe she had jumped off of a building, I believe it was, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what was interesting about that is she tends to take sort of a leadership role in this as though that's her karma, at least in the spiritual plane that we're talking about on the other side. Now, kind of describe what that was all about there.
Our personalities transcend time, and we take all of our experiences, our love, and when we move over and our soul leaves our body and becomes spirit, we take all that information with us. Michelle had been a leader in this lifetime. She was captain of the softball team. She was always in charge of all her friends. All her friends went to her as the point of the leader. She led in student government. She was a leader in her family. So taking the leading role when she moved to the other side was very easy for her because that's what she did here. But as far as her karma goes in reference to cleaning up her karma because of kind of dissuading from the act that she did, like, rectifying her taking her past, and there was no rectification. It was, I still want to help people because that was her MO here on Earth. That's all her whole identity was, how can she help people? How can I be the best that I can be? I wanted to be a perfectionist. And in the book, I talk about a lot of the archetypes that are at high risk. She was one of those high-risk archetypes where in her life, she always was number one. She was always sought out as the one everybody looked to. She was the leader. She was the go-to person. And when she went to college, I use the analogy, before college, she was a big fish in a pond. When she went to college, she was a big fish in an ocean. And that conceptual reality sometimes overwhelms the individual, leading to anxiety, leading to fear, leading to not being able to keep up, depression, anxiety, and other psychological and physical attributes that make them feel that they can't keep up with their life.
I was reminded of some people that I went to high school with who were those kind of high achievers, great at sports, good grades, everybody loved them, that kind of a thing. And I was pretty mediocre in school, I guess. I made my attempts to do different things here, but growing up in Los Angeles, you were kind of out there in the streets, so you kind of realized, well, this is really what the real world was like. And we moved from there up to Oregon, and I went to a little high school which was out in the countryside, which was kind of, I guess, a nice change of pace, but I couldn't wait to get out. But this is where these people I'm talking about were. And I seen sort of in some ways, the bravado they had. Like they had it all together. People were telling them how special they were. I'm sure their parents were doing the same thing. Of course, after graduation, a few years later, in some cases, some of these people had scholarships. Whatever happened to those guys? Well, they just fell apart. And I'm thinking, really? Okay, well, sometimes that happens. And I guess that really does, especially for these people that you talk about in your book. They go into that and they feel overwhelmed because they realize, okay, I was special here and it seemed things came easy, but out here I actually have to work. I have to kind of reconfigure who I am, and that can be very overwhelming if you don't have a support system that can help you navigate that world. And college can be a very lonely place.
Daniel, you're absolutely right. Not only can it be lonely, it can be very frightening, especially if you're somebody who is an overachiever and has not experienced some of the life lessons that somebody who wasn't an overachiever was. For example, failure. A lot of these overachievers have never felt failure. They've always been number one. And when you go to college, failure is always available and is not only an option, is a reality. So they didn't have those tools to deal with that when they were younger. That's why I often talk when I present in presentations is parents need to let their children fail. Failure is the greatest gift you can give your child because that allows them to learn about themselves. It allows them to learn about their self-confidence, their ability to handle situations, their ability to take a look at the tools that the Creator has given them and use them in a productive, healthy way to solve a problem. A lot of these overachievers really never had a lot of problem-solving situations because they were always number one. They were always, everything that might not have not come easy, but always fell easily on their doorstep.
Now, you ask a very unique question to each one of the people you have the opportunity to talk with in your book, What Happens the Day After, and that is, what can you tell me just before you committed the act of suicide that was going on that you found unusual or interesting? Tell us about that, because this is where you see sort of, I guess, as you would call that, the angels kind of looking out for you like, look, dude, you got a life contract here. You're going in a direction you shouldn't be going. We're kind of throwing you some signs here, but let's talk about that a little bit. That to me I found very intriguing.
You know what? That was one of the most fascinating questions that Michelle came up with. And she was the one who told me of what was happening before she passed. For example, a couple of days before she decided to actually take her life, she went shopping, she bought gifts for her family, she wrote letters to everybody, and as she's running around campus, she happens to run into her softball coach from high school. Now, she's on a very large campus, and it's really odd that she would run into her softball coach at that time of the year in the fall on campus. And her softball coach engages with her in a conversation. Hey, how you doing? You look like you lost some weight. What's going on? Talk to me. And she refuses to engage with him. She's like, I'm really busy. I got to go. And she dismisses him. And in doing so, I talked to the angels and found out that he was sent to her by the angels because he was taking another child that he had in his high school to see this college because his parents could not do it. So he agreed to take this child to see this college, and he happens to run into her. There are no chance, connections there. I don't believe in it's a coincidence. It's the synchronicity of the universe that connects us, that helps us to send signs. Then she was running some other errands, and she's running into class, and a dog jumps on her, and she turns around and she plays with the dog, and it's exactly looks like the dog that she had when she was growing up. And she plays with it, and it gives her kisses, and it makes her feel really good. And then she looks around, there's no owner to the dog. The dog's gone. She turns around and she looks again, and it disappears. It's another sign from Spirit that she needs to stop and take a look at the beauty of her life, that there are interactions being established for her to let her know that she is loved, that there is a meaning to her life. One of the other things that she also found while she was walking to class one day, on a branch was a scarf from a teacher that she really, really loved, and she had the same cologne or perfume that she remembered her teacher having, and she had a really great relationship with this teacher. She took the scarf and she just tucked it in her knapsack and continued on. All these were signs from Spirit letting her know that there are people that she could reach out to. There are people that were trying to connect with her. There were signs letting her know that you are loved, that there is a purpose to your life, that you are needed, and that you can reach out not only to the physical but the spiritual as well, and that we're never alone, that we have a spiritual family that watches over us, protects us, guides us, loves us, and wants to help us even in times of trouble.
And I was reminded, we've done many segments, especially on dreaming, and one of the most fascinating ones that I really enjoyed was a guest we had on the program who talked about waking dreams, which is exactly what you're talking about here in a certain way. And I said, okay, well, let's outline. There were 3 criteria that let you know you're having a waking dream. In other words, this is something you need to pay attention to. It has to be something that is shocking. It has to be something that's repetitive. And it has to be something that's out of the ordinary, you know. And it was interesting because just before this segment, I was walking along, taking a walk one day, and here's what I found. I actually found a dead crow. Now, most people would say, well, big deal. How often do you really see a dead crow? You just don't see them. No. And I thought, okay, that's unusual, so I guess I should pay attention to what's going on. And with that question that Michelle had posed to you, you know, this is, you know, one of those things to ask these people. You find yourself in a very unique realm that these people were actually, you know, somebody was waving a white flag saying, no, stop for a minute and see about maybe seeing if you can get help somehow, talk to somebody. But a lot of these people, if not most of them, didn't feel that was something they could do. And why is that?
Well, you know, I don't think it wasn't something they could do. I don't think they were familiar with the signs. You know, they weren't familiar with how spirit works, that there is a spiritual family, that there are angels who can actually manifest physical signs like feathers, pennies, quarters, and can be instrumental in putting people in your way, in your path, in your life, to help guide you, to inspire you, to also open you up so that you can receive the help. That was one of the biggest components to write the book, was to share that aspect of how spirit works with us, how our angels work with us, how even our loved ones and deceased animals still interface with us from the other side.
I had a wonderful opportunity years ago to talk with Eric Schwartz, who was one of the people who headed up what was known as the afterlife experiments. Is that something you're familiar with?
Vaguely.
Okay, what they had decided to do, I believe it was in the 1990s, is for cable television, I believe it was even HBO, is they were going to bring together what would be considered the best mediums, you know, and to see if there was this other side, and they did what was called the afterlife experiments. And when you read this book, it brings you to tears because it talks about the signs that as the loved ones pass to the other side, they give you signs trying to get your attention to let you know that they're there. And I know that as you begin this book in the story of Angela and Michelle, you know, Angela is really kind of pressing, you know, what is Michelle telling? Why did she do this? How did she do this, sort of a thing? And you say that you have one particular line of criteria that you follow is that you try not to manipulate the information, that you really try to, as purely as possible, convey what is being conveyed to you.
That's correct. And that's very hard. I'm a professional psychic medium, and it's taken me 30 years plus to work in such a way that my job is not only to deliver the information, but to help my clients heal. Not only my physical clients, the family that's left behind, the friends that are left behind, but also those on the other side that require healing as well. And delivering the messages that come through in most cases are healing. Some of it's hard to hear. Sometimes people are not ready to hear it, and sometimes even loved ones on the other side are not ready to talk about certain information. So it requires multiple readings. It requires multiple contact because it's a process. Healing is a process. There's the 5 stages of grieving, and then on the other side, there are stages of understanding and accepting what goes on the other side. When you pass, it's a process. The first process you go through is understanding that you're no longer in body, and then you go to the healing hospital, and then you go into an awareness where your guardian angel sits down and talks with you, and then depending on how you passed and why you passed, and in this particular case, an unnatural passing allows you to look at your life review and look at your life book, your life contract, much faster than if it was a natural passing.
Now, we've talked a little bit, or fairly a good amount of time, about what it was like for these overachievers who would go to college and realize, wow, this is a big world that I'm not used to navigating. But there are different stories in this book, too, that I would like to address, and one of them is the story of Dan. Let's talk about him for a little bit.
God, Dan was a character. Dan...
Pretty blatant. He says, you're going to sit down, I've got a story to tell you. Interestingly enough, my name's Dan for short, and I'm Daniel, and we're going to tell a story here.
Yep, we're going to tell a story here. He jumped my fence because I have a spiritual perimeter where my spiritual family protects my bedroom. It's the only time I get a little sanctuary and hopefully some sleep, because a lot of people don't know this, but privately, for probably 40 years or so, I've been helping those who pass over, who don't realize they've passed over. So I do a lot of private work privately at night, helping those who either are lost or haven't realized they've passed, to pass to the light, to accept family members. I work with a lot of guardian angels. I work with the Creator. So in doing that, I'm very versed in understanding how the passing goes and what's needed, and what protection I need, because not everybody is great and good when you pass over. But Daniel happened to jump the gate, and he comes into my bedroom and he starts playing with my window verticals and gets my attention. And Daniel had a story to tell, and it's a very heart-wrenching but awesome story about the life that he lived and the difficulties and challenges he faced, but then also on the other side, the great things he could have done if he had stayed, and the difficulty he faced living in the part of the country that he lived in, also having the sexual orientation that he did. So there was a lot of components to his passing that he found very difficult to live with.
And that was realizing he was different because he was homosexual, and it was something that his father just couldn't deal with, and so it was pretty rough for his life right there, wasn't it?
It was very rough for him. Also being in the part of the country where that's, even till to this day, is still not readily accepted. So he had to face a lot of his life on his own, and there were some family dynamics that also played a part into this. And the life that he led was very difficult. And my heart broke for him while I was writing the book. And to this day, Dan stops by and talks to me and tells me how he's doing on the other side and who he's working with to help them adjust to life on the other side.
And the interesting thing about the other side karma, as we mentioned earlier about Michelle seemed to be the one leading people to you to get this done. In Dan's case, he was making it comfortable for people to cross over into heaven. So it seems to me like there's a certain talent, or as you said, this unique personality trait that you carry that over, and that becomes your responsibility. Call that the karmic tie, if you will.
Correct, as well as we all, when we move over, depending on our level of consciousness and availability, there are jobs on the other side. You just don't get to go over, or you can, but most people don't go over and just hang out. Most people actually go to work, and there are jobs that you can do, like helping people transition, helping those who've transitioned who are fearful or who haven't made the transition smoothly, as well as being part of the teams that help humans here on Earth. We're never alone. We're always with a spiritual family. There's always a guardian angel with us, helping us, guiding us, giving us intuition, thoughts, insight. How many times do you go to bed stressed out and fearful, overwhelmed over a situation, and then you wake up in the morning and you have clarity? It's like, oh my God, that's the solution to the problem, or that's the answer. Well, that came from your guardian angel. It came from your spiritual team. When you're sleeping, it's the availability for them to get through to you into your consciousness much easier than during the day. So they're always with us. And that's why in the book I wanted to talk about how not only they're in our consciousness, but they're in our daily lives with actual factual situations, signs, and interactions.
Now, one of the big ones, too, even in light of Dan's story of, coming out, realizing he was different, he's homosexual, one of the big ones that you see that we're dealing with this day and age, it seems to cause a lot of confusion, comes through the story of Mary.
Yep.
I wanted to kind of bring these because people, we started off with the college thing, but on the other hand, you take a look at some real serious situations here, like with Dan, and now we're going to talk about Mary a little bit here, and realize, wow, because we're going to move into what these people, as they committed this act of deciding to not fulfill their life contracts, what they really experience in heaven from their perspective. But let's talk about Mary first.
Mary was, in the big scheme of things, I want to just clarify something. Mary, as well as Dan, represented a large group of individuals that came to me as a group. Each group decided to have a spokesperson step forward and speak on their behalf. And in doing so, sharing their story, each one had slightly unique stories. However, the majority of the conversations were the same. And that's what I really wanted to also make very clear. Even though they're specific individuals who step forward and tell their story, it represents a collective consciousness, a collective group of individuals who had a lot of the same situations. And that, to me, was a very telling and overwhelming situation for me to deal with, was to see just how many people each situation encompassed.
And I'm glad you said that because, again, I keep bringing back, you've now crossed over and now you have a karmic tie. And in this situation here, you said these people became the representatives of that particular collective consciousness that were experiencing pretty much the same thing. Now, what they discovered as they had decided to end their life contract well before they were supposed to, what was their experience in the heaven they came to know?
Their experience in the heaven that they came to know was that their pain, their reasons for taking their life, their situations didn't end. They had to continue fulfilling their life contract because their life was intertwined with everybody else's. Nobody is an island. No life is independent. It's like a virtual spider web. And that spider web is connected with somebody else, whether you realize it or not. Even the person that you cross the street and pass while you're crossing the street has a connection to you. We reincarnate in groups. We reincarnate for situations, reasons, and things that we might not even realize or be in control over. But we are all interconnected, and that interconnected woven aspect is what I wanted everybody to understand, because the entire group, the spiritual group, wanted to share that because it was important, because they didn't know that before they left.
Now, as I understand it, as you wrote, they also had a review of their lives to realize, as a result of you not fulfilling this contract here, or at least stopping it short, this was the effect of your cause. What was that like?
Overwhelming.
I know I could see by the, toward the end of the book, look, I'm running out of gas, I'm done with this, and you got your tag team saying, hold on a minute, you're not finished yet, we'll help you with this.
Yeah, there were days and weeks that I actually had to take a break and just recharge. Especially when you asked me about Mary and her whole group of being sexually assaulted and raped. That was such a hard chapter for me to write and watch and talk to, because it's so predominant on our campuses, much more predominant than is even reported. And to hear from, not only from Mary and from Rachel and all the young women who talked to me, but just to see from each generation how many women it affected was overwhelming. There were days I felt like my whole life was sucked out of me. I couldn't even get out of bed. And my poor dogs, Wizard and Halo, they took the brunt of it. There were days I fed them, but I forgot to walk them. They would be piddling and pooping in the house only because I was so engrossed in speaking to everybody.
Now, they also describe, too, how heaven, and believe me, this isn't a religious denomination where this is anything here, so we're just kind of using heaven as an afterlife way, but that people who actually fulfill their life contracts, there's a different plane they go to, isn't there?
There's a different plane, there's a different reality, because a natural passing means that you fulfilled your contract. You came here, you not only fulfilled your contract, you helped others fulfill it. You also either learned your lessons or didn't learn your lessons, but that'll be part of your life review, and in doing so, you'll figure out whether you're going to come back to this life or not, and how you'll do that, whether it's male or female, whether it's in one specific part of the world or another. So it's a whole different aspect versus an unnatural passing where you've taken yourself out of the equation. And doing so has not only voided other people's contract in the sense of leaving it a big hole and a void, but you've also left the void in the universe. And whatever you were special to do, whatever you were designed to do, whatever you were destined to do, nobody replaces you. There are no substitutes. And that's what I wrote in the book, and it was very clear. And in reading the book, I'm sure you got the sense too, there were many, many times Spirit came through and said, this is not about religion. This is not about culture. This is not about a belief structure in the sense of whether you believe one thing or another. It's about the facts that go on when you pass and what happens before you pass. So it doesn't matter what culture, what religion, where you live in the world. A lot of the same attributes and reasons for why people pass are the same. And the transition is the same no matter what you believe and what culture you belong to.
Now, what I found fascinating was an experience that I had as I was reading What Happens the Day After, and that was I was reminded of a girlfriend of mine, not that we were dating, but she was a good friend of mine, and real bubbly and happy, that sort of a thing. And one day we went out and we decided to sit down and have some lunch, and I seen that she was troubled about something. And I didn't realize to the extent of it, but she says, there are times I'm actually thinking about committing suicide. But man, that must feel pretty rough having that feeling going on. And I didn't really go to ask, why. Most people would do that immediately. I just tried to give her the space to talk about it. And she says, sometimes life just feels pretty overwhelming. And I think she was about 24, 25 years old at the time. So she's not much, older than these people that you talk about in your book here. And I came to a point and I said, dying is easy. Living is hard. But let me tell you, as an example, what you're experiencing now, this pain, I know it's not easy. I mean, this is your pain. It's very unique. But if you can find yourself being able to put one foot in front of the other, if you could just do that and realize this pain is temporary, and if you're willing to reach out, and see if there's someone who can help you, and that you can see the possibility of overcoming this very temporary obstacle that seems like it'll never end, then you have provided the opportunity to help someone else just like you going through the same thing. And if you make that decision to, let's just say, end it all, then you've basically done the same thing to this other person here. You're karmically tied to that. And that was a lot of the same experiences that it seemed to be shared through these people that realized, wait a minute, yeah, we hear that suicide is a selfish act, not that it means to be. It's just somebody who doesn't know how to get rid of the pain. They just don't know how to go about doing it. But they reviewed their lives on the other side, as you described, and realized just how kind of catastrophic this is, the opportunities they took away from other people that may now have to maybe one day visit them as a result.
That's a really great point, and I want to answer it in two separate instances. One is in not only in speaking to everybody who passed over in my practice for over 35 years, I've come across thousands of people, and I think we all at one point in our life have asked, why are we here? What's our purpose? And all of us have thought about, it's a wonderful life. What if we weren't here? What would happen? I think that's not that most people take it to the next further steps, but have conjured and thought up of those ideas because life is difficult. Life is overwhelming. And older generations have a little bit more experience and substance to handle that. That's why in the book I answer those questions, as well as the younger generation doesn't have that experience and substance because of technology, of the way that they were brought up. The younger generations are more impulsive. They see things as a sitcom where here's a beginning and end, and it's a very short period of time. They're not used to having to deal with situations that take a lot longer to heal, to rectify, to take care of. And a lot of times, parents' education makes it seem like it's easy, meaning here's a problem, here's a solution, we rectified it, we've moved on in a very short period of time. In the real world, things take a lot longer to fix. And
isn't that the truth? I was just thinking about, too, the Cinderella syndrome or Snow White. It's almost like Disney created the happily ever after. It's like, but then the next day, the prince became an alcoholic because he became broke because his castle was overrun. How are you going to deal with that happily ever after now?
Correct. And that happily ever after syndrome is a lot of what these young adolescents, is because of society, because of technology, have that lack of impulse control, meaning they're so used to having that quick fix. And life is not a quick fix. Even though the situation they're in is very valid and it makes them feel overwhelmed or depressed or anxious or angry, whatever they're feeling is very valid. What they have a hard time understanding is how to deal with that, because it's a long-term feeling. And I talk about this quite a lot in my lectures, is depression is like cancer. Once it gets a hold of you, it feeds into your entire body. Every cell, every organ feels that depression. It's not only physical, it's mental, it's psychological. And once it takes hold, it is as debilitating as cancer can be. And these young adolescents do not see that as one of the issues that need to be addressed. They dismiss it, they put it to the side, and also, let's be quite frank, the stigma of nobody ever wants to be called mental or having a mental issue is something that these young adolescents try to avoid at all due costs. And we need to look at that as a society, as a family, and say we need to change that. We need to take that stigma away, because if we don't, we're not giving the proper support and help to these young adolescents who desperately need it.
Now, as you do your lectures, and I'm sure you talk and speak with a wide variety of audiences, what sort of challenges have you experienced, let's say, maybe from religious groups or people in general? I mean, this, to a degree, is a fairly bold book.
Yes, it is. I'm a pioneer in writing this book, and I knew this on the onset of taking this challenge, because there's nobody speaking about this particular aspect and topic. Everybody seems to want to sweep it under the carpet. And I understand from a family's perspective, they don't want their children being stigmatized even after they've passed, or the family having the stigma that their child committed suicide. But by not speaking it, it enables the rest of the world to think it's not an issue, as well as the children and teenagers and adolescents who are in trouble need to know that there's others in trouble. Because once we start to collectively put that out there, we can not only send the message that there are others like you and that there is help, but that this is an epidemic and we need to address it. I will tell you, almost every college I've spoken to has a mental health department, a suicide prevention department. When I went to college, there was no such thing as that. I know in New Jersey, prior to the beginning of the school year, every teacher in middle school and high school has to take a 3-day suicide prevention course. It's at that level right now. The reason I put the book together as a 360 book was to address parents, educators, teachers, and adolescents on the signs to look for, how to help, who should be the first responders, what are the things we need to respond to, how do we respond to it, how do we have a dialogue with our children, how do we have a dialogue in society, because we need to start talking about this because it's not going away.
Now, from your experience, and we're looking at, approaching 40 years now, what do you see the reason or a possible reason of this being an epidemic?
The lack of generations not having the tools to deal with lifestyle tools, life skills, of not being able to communicate. You go to any restaurant and you watch not only adults but children playing on their devices, texting, emailing. They don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to have a physical exchange that says, I know how to read body language. I know how to communicate with you. I know how to handle disagreement. I know how to handle a problem. I know how to have a conversation where it's healthy and versus unhealthy, so I know conflict resolution. I believe technology is one of the foundation problems of why we're seeing these young adolescents have difficulty dealing with life. Also, let's not forget the bullying. When we talk about that in the book, Julia and Julia is also about mother and daughter and what they went through. And she was 13 years old when she took her life because she was bullied. And that's a big component of what we see right now in society, because these young adolescents are in their home privately texting, doing whatever, and they can say whatever they want without no repercussions or response, no physical response. And that also doesn't allow them to understand the nature of what they're doing. Right.
And Teresa, the other alarming, I was just watching a documentary not too long ago, I think it was called Gamers. And it was mostly surrounded about the virtual reality games, things like World of Warcraft. And there were some really fascinating things that people were talking about, that if you really want to play the game seriously, you got to spend some time doing this. And but they said there's a real big sacrifice that comes with that. And although you're gaming with people in real time, maybe even from around the world, you build this avatar to go out on these adventures, and maybe you collaborate with other people, and you actually talk and you communicate with them. And in some cases, people are actually falling in love and getting married, believe it or not. But what was interesting is what a couple of them said is, I found myself playing this game, and if I played for a good level of time, we're talking for several months, I would find that my social skills began to deteriorate, and that I would actually have to put the game away and not play it for a while so I could get back into society and realize what it is, that I need to do to be socially adept. And you're seeing more and more people go in that direction as though that is a reality. And I'm thinking, is the world really that bad that you got to escape into an area that you're really, truly more in control than you normally would be out here? And it becomes very alarming to think about those things. Not that I'm pointing and saying those are bad things, that games are bad, but the fact that you're getting these kinds of games that are so interactive that for some people they slip into, and that becomes the reality.
You're absolutely right. In the chapter Life is a Kaleidoscope, I detail that in great detail because I do believe that's a strong foundation to why we're seeing the amount of suicides we're seeing. And let's also be very clear here. I'm not saying that games are bad. I'm saying everything in moderation. Moderation also means going out and having a physical interaction with friends, with family, having family dinners with no social devices, going out and engaging with nature, going for a walk and not taking your cell phone or not taking your tablet. Start to live a life that actually has physical interaction, that you use all your senses, not some gaming device that provides you a life that's false. That's where the false reality comes in, and it becomes the trap door. And once the trap door becomes unlocked, they fall through, and the next thing you know, they're literally falling in their life, and they don't know how to pick up the pieces.
Well, Teresa, it's been a pleasure to have you here on the program today, and I'm glad that we were able to focus on, most of the time you talk about suicide, you talk about what are the signs, this, that, and the other, and I wanted to focus on the afterlife side because they become very aware that, wow, I need to go back and do this again. It's been said that if you commit suicide, you go right back to earth and you do it again. You go back down and you got to do this, and that's how this really works. And that you finally completed the book that you were seemingly ordered to do.
Well, and I not only ordered to do, I wanted to make it a positively riveting book filled with eternal hope and living inspiration for kids, parents, educators, so that we can have a dialogue that's inspirational. This book is an inspirational book. It's not negative. It's not, I know the topic's negative, but that's not how the book is written. The book is written for enlightenment, for hope, for understanding, not only, again, for the young adolescents who might be contemplating or might be questioning why they're here, but also for adults who have the same questions maybe throughout their life or are struggling, and for educators to not only for their own personal use, but for the children that they're responsible for, to start looking for the signs, how to address it, how to talk about it, how do we as a society change the way we're doing things, even educating our children, so that we have children to educate, that we can stop suicide and save lives.
And one of the things I also would like to encourage our listeners to consider, too, when life gets difficult, is go out and pick up a biography or an autobiography, of somebody that you've heard. It could be Thomas Edison, it could be Elvis Presley, whatever the case is, and you'll realize that what they did to get where they got to wasn't handed to them. And in some cases, the setbacks almost seem like they almost had a good reason to say, I'm done, But it becomes very inspiring to realize just how much strength you gain by going through these trials and tribulations to the point that you transcend these in such a way that you become that light. You actually become the beacon for many others to be inspired to do the very same thing. And that's certainly the direction that your book takes us in.
Yes, it is. It's exactly the direction my book takes us in. Is while there's sadness and grief in these astounding real-life accounts, there is much more light, inspiration, hope than imagined, because that's how we create the light and we become powerful and empowered, is by understanding who we really are and the gifts that the Creator gave us, which is our soul, and within our soul has many great gifts. To recognize those gifts, understand those gifts, and most importantly, share them. Sharing them becomes the quintessential gift that we give to each other.
Very good stuff. I'd like to, in closing, ask you, what kind of a response have you had from readers?
That's a really great question. My book can be purchased on What Happens the Day After or Amazon.com. I will tell you, from many, many, many readers, the overwhelming response is the book is riveting. I couldn't put the book down. Many people have said to me, I was very hesitant to read the book, and once I started reading it, I was overwhelmed by the information in a positive way. Some people have said it's made me a better parent by reading the book. Some of the other testimonials have been that it's enlightened me. I've been a follower of spirituality for a long time. It connects the dots to which I never thought were connected. It's also given me insight on how to handle my children better and how to raise my children. Here's one. I had reservations at first because I didn't know if I wanted to read the book. I was curious about it, and I couldn't put the book down. I started in the afternoon, and I read all through the night. From another educator that said that I should be in her school teaching the different aspects of the book so that we can save lives. It's a great enlightening read. We're all connected, and eye-opening, thought-provoking. And that was the other thing I want to share with you. I wanted people to think about this book. This book is not a book just to be read. It's to be experienced. It's an experience that you'll never forget because you get to actually walk in the shoes of each individual person who is in this book. And they've shared their stories on a very intimate, loving level in order.
Well, Teresa, all I can say is thank you so much for joining us here on the program. I was happy to actually bring this to our listeners here. Again, my recommendation also, get out there and read biographies and autobiographies. You'll realize you're not the only one going through the situation. It may be your unique situation, no doubt about it, but you realize, hey, we've all got a lot of obstacles and hurdles that we've got to climb, but that's what makes life pretty interesting, doesn't it?
Yes, it is. It makes it interesting, and it makes us have great experiences that not only we can remember, but we can share. And once you've shared that experience, you've learned it, you can help somebody else. And that's the whole reason why we're here, is to help each other. That's why we're all interconnected. So please pick up my book, read it, and share it with others so that we can all help each other, not only save lives, but start to understand how our angels work with us, as well as our spiritual family. And Daniel, you've been a great interviewer. I want to thank you so much for having me on your show.
No problem with that. And before you leave, I know you've got a website. What is it?
It's TeresaCommunicates.com, and that's TERESA communicates.com. You can purchase my book there or go to What Happens the Day After, and my book can also be purchased on Amazon.com. And Daniel, again, you've been a great interview, and I want to thank you for such awesome questions, and I hope your listeners have enjoyed our show. And please, read my book, share my book, help those in need, and live the life that you love. That's the most important message.
And on behalf of Beyond 50 and Teresa, we look forward to seeing you all on the other side. Thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more. Visit us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our weekly e-newsletter. Stay up to date on what's going on with Beyond 50, as well as upcoming segments as well. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.